What's up guys, Fail Moon Circus here. Today I'm going to be profiling my Angel Beats deck. Now I held off on this for a while now, mostly because I wanted to come as close to a quote-unquote perfect 50 as possible, and I spent quite a lot of time testing it and making a lot of small changes along the way, and after a while I realized that I don't think I'll ever really get to that perfect 50. I'm probably always going to be making a couple of changes here and there depending on things I want to try out, depending on meta shifts, a lot of small things like that. But I think it's pretty helpful if I can just make a deck profile, even if it is a work in progress. I think it's a great way to keep track of the deck as it evolves, as it develops, as I learn new things, etc. So with that in mind, I do feel pretty confident in this list. I've played probably a few hundred games with this deck at this point, and I'm pretty happy with where it is now. So without further ado, let's get right to it. Alright, so starting off with the level zeros, I'm only playing 14 zeros in this deck. Part of the reason why is because with this deck, I feel like you're incentivized to mulligan more aggressively. You're not playing a level 1 combo, so there isn't really any level 1 that you're trying to hoard as many copies of in your hand as possible. The other thing is that you're playing 4 Operation Tornadoes and 4 Salvage Brainstorms. This makes it so you feel a little more comfortable pitching your level 1s from your opening hand to try to find your zeros, or just to dig deeper into the deck. So to start off, I'm playing 3 runners. You obviously want these in your opening hand to try to get some early tempo. I'd like to play 4, but space is just really tight, and the other thing is that this card gets a lot worse outside of your opening hand, so I think 3 is fine. We're playing 3 coin flips. At the start of your opponent's draw phase, you reveal the top card of your deck. If it's a level 1 or higher card, then return this to your hand, and also during your turn it gains 1,000. So this card is pretty useful as kind of a pseudo runner. It's a coin flip. So obviously on the first turn of the game, runners are generally better unless you're going second and this is able to beat over something that the runner might trade with. But I'm playing this primarily because we're playing a standby deck and we're also only playing 14 zeros, so we're playing a higher number of level 1 or higher cards. And not to mention, because we're playing a standby deck, we're more often going to have a defensive power on the opponent's turn, and this makes it so the opponent's going to have open columns more often. So the theory is that if your opponent has open columns more often, that's more opportunities for you to have this to try to attack into an open column and then return to your hand. And I've been liking it so far, honestly. Like, just having this as a random mid-game plus, sometimes you just randomly go like +2, +3 off of this just in mid-game. And it's pretty nice. Okay, and next we're playing, like I said earlier, 4 Salvage Brainstorms. This combos with your standby. When you play the standby, you can pay 1 stock, choose one of these characters, one of your standby targets, and stand it. I went back and forth between 3 and 4 on this quite a lot, and ultimately I settled on playing 4. And the reason why is because this is your primary mill outlet while you're at 0. We're not playing any Rikis, so we have no way to bring ourselves up to level 1 from 0-5. So sometimes if you don't have this, then and you cancel too much early on, then it can put you in a really awkward spot where you risk going from 0 to 2. And that's why I feel pretty happy playing 4 of this. Sometimes I just not sometimes, quite often actually. I just brainstorm knowing I'm not going to plus at level 0 just to try to set up my waiting room, just to try to get myself to refresh point faster. So I think you absolutely play 4 of this. Next up, we're playing two climax swaps. On play, pay 1 to climax, salvage a climax, and it also has a second effect. On play, you can return 2 characters back to your deck and give this +1 soul for the turn. Now, this card, on its face, it looks like fairly simple and straightforward, but there's a lot of cool things you can do with it. Now, if you're familiar with Angel Beats, you already know the level 3 Kanade. This one is on play. You can pay 1 stock, search for another copy of itself, and put it into play. So it's pretty cool with the climax swap, because you can have 2 of these in the waiting room, shuffle them back into the deck, play a Kanade from your hand, search for another copy of the Kanade. This triggers, and then you search for a 3rd copy. So it's pretty useful in that regard. The other thing is that this card can actually come out of nowhere and just soul rush your opponent. It gives itself +1 soul by shuffling 2 characters back. And then you can double down on the plus soul effect by shuffling characters with triggers back into your deck. So say you only have 1 or 2 cards left in the deck. You can just play this, shuffle 2 triggers back into your deck, and then suddenly your odds of hitting soul triggers becomes much higher. And it's also pretty nice because if you, let's say you have only 1 or 2 cards left in the deck, you can also use this to try to set up your stock for next turn. So you can, let's say there's a card you want to grab next turn after you refresh. You can tuck that away into your deck, trigger, and then pay it out, and then pick it back up. So that's a pretty useful trick with this. And there's also a nice little interaction here with the coin flip. Again, if you have 2 cards left in your deck, you can shuffle 2 level 1 or higher cards back into your deck, and then that increases your chances of hitting the coin flip by quite a lot, because now you're shuffling 2 more level 1 or higher back into the deck. And it also does a pretty cool thing where this isn't going to come up very often, but it's a very cool thing to do when it does. You can play this, shuffle 2 soul triggers back into your deck. They're always going to be level 1 or higher. And then you can play this, side attack with this, with a pretty high chance of hitting a trigger. And then on your opponent's turn, you can reveal the top card of your deck and try to return it to your hand. So that's a pretty nice trick you can do there. And let's see. Moving on. I'm playing 1 of this. On play, you mill 2. If there's a climax in there, then it gets +2 soul. And on attack, you can look at the top 2 cards of the deck, put 1 back on top and 1 in the waiting room. This is just a really nice lifesaver if you're trying to filter climaxes out of a small number of cards left in your deck. Because unlike brainstorms, it just mills the cards straight into your waiting room. There's no resolution zone or anything. And the other thing is when it's attacking, it's pretty useful because let's say you're attacking with this, with a 2-card deck. If you have a climax in there, you can look at the top 2 cards, put the climax straight into your waiting room, and then get a clean trigger. So it's pretty useful for that. And the other thing is once you're using it with this, and with your standby targets, which your 2/2s, which have 2 soul, you actually get a pretty nice high soul package where you're able to soul rush when necessary. And having 4 Operation Tornadoes actually plays into that pretty well, because you don't need to commit a lot of resources or a lot of slots in the deck toward that game plan. You kind of just passively have it, because these cards are just useful for doing your main game plan, and then they also have this backdoor strength to it, where or backdoor upside to it, where you can just randomly soul rush your opponent out of nowhere, and I've actually done that quite a lot. Oh, and last card, for level zeros. This is just the classic Otonashi, pay 1, ditch 1 on play, salvage a character and it gains 1,000 for a turn. If I'm being honest, and I can't, if I'm being honest, I'd rather try the drop search in place of this. The 3,500 power the turn it comes into play isn't that useful right now, and I'd rather have a drop search to have more versatility with my toolboxing, especially when I'm already playing 4 salvage brainstorms, 4 operation tornadoes, 4 standbys, and 4 choice. The other thing is that a 3k defensive power is actually pretty good right now. It's very... it gets pretty dicey whether your opponent can actually kill it when so many people are playing utility zeros. So I think once I get around, or once I'm able to actually get the card, because COVID. Anyway, once I'm able to get the card, I'd like to test that. I think I'm probably gonna like that a lot more than this. Alright, moving on to level 1s. We're playing 1 level 1 standby target. This card isn't great. It's just it can be pretty good if in the offhand chance it's already in your hand and you can discard it from your opening hand as part of your mulligan. The main reason why I'm playing this at all is because sometimes it's useful to have 1175. You can use it to pay out stock, or you can use it for defensive power. So what it does is it's a 5,500 base, it gets 500 for each of your other characters, and at the beginning of your encore phase, if you have no other characters in rest, you can pay 1 stock and put this in rest. So it's a very nice, it's a pretty nice corner case card, just because it does let you pay out your stock. It has its own built-in plussing engine for 1 stock, and it can hit 7,500, which can be decent for walling your opponent out if they're playing on reverse level 1 combos. And if you happen to have this in your opening hand and you're able to set up the brainstorm with the standby combo, then it can be pretty good there too. Yeah. We're playing 1 Sheena. Once per turn, it gains 1,500 when you use an act. Again, not a great card. Angel Beats, unfortunately, is pretty lacking in 1/0s, especially those that have good defensive power. This card is here primarily so you have a level 1 beater that doesn't cost stock to use, and that isn't reliant on the standby combo, it's a pretty nice one-up because you can grab it off Operation Tornado pretty easily. You have multiple ways you can trigger the plus 1,500 both on your turn and your opponent's. It's just a pretty nice card to have. We're playing 1 Encore support. This card is pretty useful, but I don't think you always want this necessarily. It's another piece of the toolbox package. It's pretty nice sometimes when you just like trigger a standby and then you can put this into play and go like, oh, well, now my characters have hand encore out of nowhere. And it's pretty useful in that regard. It also has a pretty neat effect. You can rest it to give something 1,000 that can be pretty relevant. We're playing 2 2K punches. So this is a 2K 1 stock punch. When you use it, if all your characters are death or anniversary, which they always are, then you can put the top card of your deck into stock. I wasn't the biggest fan of this kind of effect initially, but it grew on me like the more I played it. There are some pretty neat things you can do with it. For starters, since it's a 1/1 punch, it's got a soul trigger, and that can be pretty useful because you can grab it off a choice climax. The other thing is you can use this to funnel your resources in an interesting way. You can, if the last card you checked and put into your stock is a climax, and you can use this to pay it out. You can use it to dig 1 card deeper into your deck. And there's a pretty neat thing here where if you can play this, reveal the top card of your deck. If it's not a climax, then you have that information for deciding whether you want to use this if your opponent is front attacking on the first attack and you already know the top card of your deck. And it's also it's also nice that it's an optional blind stock. So if this reveals a climax, you can still use this punch and opt to not use the blind stock effect, knowing that the top card of your deck is a climax. Next up, we're playing 2 Yusas. This is on play, top check if it's a character or an event added to your hand and discard a card. And also on play, you can discard a character and draw a card. So this is your primary hand filter. This card is nice because if you're trying to dig for a climax, then it takes 2 cards deeper into your deck for it. You top check first and then you draw second. And this card is also pretty nice for, this is a pretty old and well-known trick at this point. You can play top check. If it's a character, then you dig 1 card deeper into your deck to try to set up your brainstorms. It's also pretty nice that it's a 3500. Like this being at level 1 is both a plus and a drawback. At 3500, it can actually beat over some of your opponent's level 0s or maybe even their weaker level 1s. And the other thing that's nice about this being level 1 is, of course, once again, the coin flip. If you reveal this, then you can return this to your hand. So it's pretty nice incidental value there. And last, we're playing 4 Operation Tornadoes. I was going back and forth between 3 and 4 for a while, and I ultimately settled on 4. The reason being that you can use it to set up your waiting room for all your salvage effects. And the other thing is that it doesn't cost any stock to play. So if you don't mind milling through your deck, it's actually pretty useful for just like grabbing something you need in your waiting room for free, essentially. And the other thing is that Angel Beats doesn't have that many ways to mill through their deck like for free, for no stock. And they do, but then they always come at opportunity costs. Like you could play the level 1, or not the level 1. You could play the level 0. Like this effectively mills you 3 cards, 2 on play and then one more on attack. But then that's an opportunity cost because it doesn't do that much else. It has niche uses, but like it's not a very good general setup or utility card. It's a card that's incredibly useful in narrow situations. And this card is nice because it lets you mill through your deck. Of course, it lets you filter, like grab something you need without paying stock. It lets you do the thing where you mulligan more aggressively, like I said earlier, to try to find your zeros or just to dig deeper into your deck. And sometimes if you're out a lot of climaxes, this is just a lifesaver because it's a mill. Yeah, that's it. Alright, next up for the level 2s, we're playing 2 or 3 level 2 standby targets. This is a 2/2. If all your characters are dead to their anniversary, it gains 2000, and when it gets reversed, you can discard a character and send this to memory until your draw step. So it's got a slight variation of hand encore. It's better in some ways and worse in others. So the big drawback, of course, is that once it gets reversed, you have to decide right then and there whether you want to discard a character to save it. And like unlike encore support, unlike hand encore, where you wait until the encore phase, you see the board state going into the next turn, you can decide right then and there, or you can decide at the end of the turn whether you want to save the character. For this one, you have to decide, like even if it gets reversed on the first attack, you have to decide whether you want to save it, and then after that, the next 2 attacks will happen. So the board state can change from there. But the plus side to this is that you can crash this on your own turn, or your opponent can punch it on your turn. And then if you choose to discard a character to save it right there, it doesn't come back on your opponent's turn. It comes back on your turn. And that can be a nice way to get a small amount of advantage, because you're not worried about killing, or you're not about your opponent killing this on their turn, since it doesn't come back until your turn. So it can be pretty useful in that regard. Next up, we're playing two of the old school Encore phase change. At the beginning of your Encore phase, if this is in rest, you can pay 1 stock, discard a card, send this to memory, and change to your level 3. And this is pretty cool because you can standby this out at level 1, and then the same turn that this standbys out, you can send it to memory and then pay 1, ditch 1, and change to level 3. The level 3 is an on change or on play from your hand heal. Now this is super cool because you can, if you trigger a standby, you can just get this and just like passively get a lot of value. You can get this out at 1 if you don't want to attack with this immediately, you can just play a standby at 1, get this out, and then change into your level 3 and heal at 1 and have a 10k. So, and you can make it even better by giving it hand encore. So that's pretty powerful. If you're able to, sometimes if you're able to standby this out and then trigger a standby and get this out on your first turn of level 1, you might just win the game right there, because that's just so much value. You're getting a 10k and a 9/5, and it's very from there the game can snowball in your favor pretty quickly. The other thing that's nice about healing at 1 is that it's kind of underrated. If you heal at 1, you can increase your chances of refreshing before you level up. So you get all the cards in your clock, they don't go back into your deck, so you get better compression that way. And so having the heal 1 is the value of the heal 1 at level 1 is pretty understated, I think. Next up, we're playing 1 free fresh punch. It's a 2/5 punch for 1 stock. You pay 2 when you use it to refresh. Shuffle your waiting room back into your deck. I debated between this and the anti-change punch for a while, and I'm still not sure which one I actually prefer to use. They're obviously very good in very different situations. Right now I'm just testing this, but I might go back to the anti-change. Of course, it's very meta dependent too. And next up, we have 1 level support. It's an on play, give something 1,000. It's fairly straightforward. You want a level support sometimes to hit bigger numbers because your 2/2 is only a 9/5 on its own. Other thing is that the plus 1,000 on play can be pretty relevant. It lets you hit really big numbers, and it's also just nice as a one-off standby target. That's about it, really. Alright, last up for level 3s. We're playing 2 change targets. This card is kind of clunky at more than 2 copies. It's an engine requirement. You use it because you're playing the changer. I think it's worth the 2 slots. It doesn't feel extremely clunky at 2 copies. It's still pretty nice if you want to just hard cast it at 3 to heal. Next up, we're playing for the finisher Kanade. This combos with a choice. It's when you play it from your hand, you can pay 1 stock, search for another copy of itself, put it into play, and then when you play the choice, you can choose a character, give it +1 soul, and on cancel burn 2. So it's a powerful and versatile finisher, and it's very efficient. You can just get 3 copies out with only 4 stock, and then once you play the climax, you can it becomes pretty versatile because you can spread the +1 soul and cancel burn 2 any number of ways. You can do stuff like 1-1-1, or you can even go 0-1-2, or even 0-0-3. So it's depending on how your opponent's deck is set up, like how many climaxes are left, etc. Like being able to decide how you want to spread this out is pretty useful. And on that note, we're playing one old school level 3 Yuri. The character opposing this gets -1 soul. And more importantly, on attack, you can pay 4 stock, send X characters to a waiting room, and deal X damage. That pairs really well with the Kanade because what you can do is you can bring out 2 Kanades in this. When you play the choice, just give this 2+2 soul and 2 instances of cancel burn 2. And that makes it so this is both an extremely powerful and an extremely versatile finisher. If your opponent cancels the burn off of this, then they still eat the cancel burn 2 off the Kanades. That also pushes this to the point where it can front for a ton of soul damage, or it can side even level 3s for a decent amount of soul damage. So one thing I do pretty often once I get this set up, I bring my opponent up to 3-5, and then once this is here, I just go side for 2, pay 4, send 2 characters to a waiting room, burn 2. If they cancel either one of those, then they burn 2 more times. And then at that point, they have to cancel everything, otherwise they lose. And this combination is nice because it has a very high robbery factor. Like you don't need a lot of. I mean, you need 7 stock to hardcast all of this. Like 2 for this, 3 to get 2 Kanades out, and then afterward, you have 2 stock left. You attack with these 2 first, go up to 4 stock, then you have exactly 4 stock for this effect. But anyway, my point is, it is kind of stock intensive, but it doesn't require that many cards in your hand. Like once you have 7 stock, this is all you really need in your hand to have that whole combo. So it's a very efficient and very powerful and very versatile finisher. Next up, we have. I probably should have done this earlier, but we're playing 3 early play heals. If you have 4 more characters, this gets -1 level in your hand. On play, it gains 2k and heal 1. This is pretty straightforward. This is probably the best early play heal effect, just because you don't need a certain number of climaxes in your waiting room. You don't need to mill through your deck to try to set it up or anything. The only drawback is that, of course, once you play the first one, you'll have a full field because you need 4 more characters to begin with. And then it's a -1 if you want to play more. In that sense, it does work pretty well with well, actually, I guess if you're playing the Yuri, then, like, if you're hardcasting the Yuri, then it's already a -1 from your hand. But like, this package here gives you the ability to grind at level 2, like against decks that really want to just stay at 2 for a really long time. It gives you a game against those. Because in those matchups, like standbying, if you're able to standby the Yuri, like that gives you so much more ability to fight them at level 2. The other thing is that sometimes you don't mind just like hardcasting this and changing to this just for the heal at level 2. I actually usually feel fairly comfortable doing that just because the end game is so like low resource in terms of like how much hand you actually need to use it. The other thing that's nice about I guess it's more of a nice thing about the coin flips, but one thing that's nice is that you can play this to meet the 4 more character requirement for the early play. Play the early play, and then next on your opponent's turn, there's a chance you can just return this to your hand, and try to set this up again next turn. Like you have one more card in your hand to try to meet the 4-character requirement. So that's pretty useful. And last but not least, we're playing... Last but not least, we're playing 4 standbys, 4 choice. I really like this combination. The standby is especially nice because you get the same effect whether you draw or trigger. And so what this deck is pretty nice. Like this trigger lineup is nice because it gives you so much value when you do trigger these, and sometimes you actually just want to trigger these. Like you have some great standby targets with this. You have the 2/2 Yuri. You can use this to grab a finisher to try to save on stock. You have the the changer. So I think you're like, well, you even have stuff like I mean these aren't like great standby targets, but like these are nice little interactions that are worth keeping in mind and are pretty small upsides. You can do stuff like let's say you crash the character. You can, if you trigger a standby afterward, you can grab your coin flip and try to return it to your hand. So you play the coin flip in place of the character that just got reversed. Try to return it to your hand and just get like a passive +1. And the choice, I mean, we already know like choice is just really good. You can add the cards to your stock or to your hand. And that's it.